Installation instruction for the TAC21 chassis. Before starting, read all safety and installation instructions, and be sure your firearm is unloaded. Remove the old stock. With a 1/8 inch drift punch and a small hammer, drift out the rear trigger pin towards the opposite side from the safety. Be sure to retain the bolt stop spring and keep it from flying out. Remove the bolt stop and bolt stop spring. Your trigger now will be loose from one end and the sear will no longer be locked. Make sure you do not lose the sear spring. Drift out the front trigger pin towards the same side. You can now remove the trigger from the action. Reinstall sear spring and sear into trigger using the 2 small trigger slave pins included in your kit. This will hold the trigger together for reinstallation. Trial fit action into the action housing. Place the action housing with rail down in a vise with soft jaws, or on the table in some cloth or a towel. To install the trigger safety must be on safe. Slide action out of the action housing approximately 1 inch. Drop in the trigger with safety lever into the safety slot recess. Slide barreled action into action housing and guide the trigger into position. With the trigger and action in place, slide in the short front trigger pin from the opposite side to the safety lever. Use a drift punch to push out the trigger slave pin through the action and drift it flush with the bolt stop notch. Place bolt stop into its proper place with the hook end to the rear and underneath the bolt release plunger. Insert bolt stop spring with tweezers. Press down with a screwdriver on the bolt stop spring and insert the long rear trigger pin through the bolt stop, through spring, and through the action pushing out the second trigger slave pin. Use a drift punch and drive it flush with the bolt stop. Place 2 3/16 inch dowel pins into action housing. This will align the trigger housing with the action housing. Place trigger housing onto dowel pins and press down firmly until flush with the action housing. Place the 2 action bolts into trigger housing, screw in until snug. Push barreled action into action housing until the recoil lug is flush with the action housing. Hand tighten the 2 action screws. Torque the action screws to 60 inch-pounds starting with the rear screw. Slide the fore-end onto the barrel and action housing and secure with 3 1032 screws. Torque to a maximum of 36 inch-pounds so as not to strip the helicoils. Install the pistol grip. Install bolt into action. Install buffer tube and buttstock into end cap. Slide out end cap push pin and slide end cap onto the end of the action housing. Secure with push pin. Now check the function of the bolt, trigger, and safety, again making sure your firearm is not loaded. Now your build is complete and ready for scope and rings. For more information on modular driven technologies, visit mdttac.com.